In this unit, we will learn about the history and different schools of psychology. Let me introduce you to the father of experimental psychology. He is called Wang. He emphasized that the soul was not irrelevant, and psychology had nothing to do with the soul. Instead, psychology research should focus on analyzing the conscious behavior and thought patterns. So he promoted that psychology should rely on introspection. So this is to observe one's own experiences. So the limitation of this approach include that data collected actually cannot be verified and it is highly subjective. So how can we tell that an individual is observing their mind accurately? So we cannot answer these questions, and that's one of the limitations of his approach. Focusing on the conscious experience is the school of Structuralism. So Structuralism is a school of psychology, but they focus on analyzing the basic elements, so the small parts that constitute the mind. So this school of psychology was brought to the United States by his student called Titchener. Now let's switch gears to a slightly different school of psychology called functionalism. So as a recap, structuralism is to understand the mind using different structures, but for functionalism, they focus on the whole brain rather than the structures of the mind. Functionalism emphasizes the purpose of mental processes like thoughts, feelings, and behaviors rather than their individual parts. So they propose that consciousness is ongoing and continuous, so it shouldn't be made of specific elements or structures. So this school of psychology was inspired by Darwin's natural selection. So survival and reproduction actually guides our behavior. In a similar line of functionalism is the school of psychology called Gestalt. This was brought up by Max Wertheimer. He also opposed Wang's structuralism. So he emphasized that we often see the whole part rather than the individual components of a whole. Let's see some principles of Gestalt in the next few slides. Emergence is one of the principles of Gestalt. Look at the picture. So you should be able to see the U shape directly. But at the second glance, you may see different small components like the bee or the flowers that make up the U. So this notion is that we are able to perceive the world without thinking too much about the small details, but rather we look at the whole picture first. So this is a central element to Gestalt theory, being that we see the entirety of objects automatically rather than focusing on the individual part. The next principle of Gestalt is called reification. We tend to prefer complete shapes, so we automatically will fill in the gaps between elements to perceive a whole image. Looking at the image in the middle, we tend to first see an image of a white triangle covering 3 black circles. So although there are no solid lines for the triangle, we tend to fill in the blanks to create a whole and complete image, where a triangle will be perceived in the picture, although there are no solid lines being drawn. The next principle is called multi-stability. So it's the tendency of different perceptual experiences to pop back and forth. So in this image, there are 2 different perceptual experiences. You should be able to see a vase and also 2 faces looking at each other. But we cannot see the vase and the 2 faces at the same time. Rather, they pop back and forth. So this switching sensation is called multi-stability. For the final Gestalt principle that we will cover here is called invariance. So we can actually recognize objects, no matter how we change its format or conditions. So here in the image, no matter how we rotate the A part of the image, we are still able to recognize it in the D format. This principle is crucial for recognizing faces in real life. So thanks to invariance, we are able to recognize our friends and family when they change their clothing or put on different makeup. Moving on to the next school of psychology, we will now focus on the psychoanalytic theory. So this is to note on the importance of unconscious mental processes in shaping one's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. So Sigmund Freud was fascinated by hysteria patients. So he theorized that the actions that people do are actually stem from their painful childhood experiences that is not readily available to our conscious memory. So in his approach, he used psychoanalysis to bring the unconscious material into conscious awareness. Till this point, we have introduced two different schools of psychology that rely on introspection. So that is to use one's subjective observation in order to understand their own experience. So in the next few slides, we will focus on different schools of psychology that move away from introspection. We have briefly touched base on Skinner's works on rats before. So he and John B. Watson challenged the idea of solely focusing on the inner experiences. So they argue that we should focus on observable behavior. They think that the actions that we make are determined by our genes and the environment. So this was quite similar to the concept brought up by the functionalist psychologists. So in behaviorism, they focus on principles of learning and want to know how to predict and control human and animals' behaviors. Humanistic psychology is an approach that is quite different from the schools that we have covered so far. So they are objective to different types of determinism. First, they oppose that all actions are determined by the unconscious. So this is against Freud. Second, they oppose the fact that actions are determined by genes and the environment. So this is against behaviorism. And if you could recall, this is also part of functionalism. So Maslow proposed the concept of self-actualization. So he regards this as the highest level of human needs. And it is a process by which we may achieve our full potential. In his therapy, he will help clients achieve this. And for Rogers, he takes on a different approach than psychoanalysis. So in psychoanalysis, the therapist will play an important role in interpreting the behavior of the unconscious mind. So for Rogers, he takes on an approach called client-centered therapy. So the client may take a lead role in the therapy session. Rogers also values unconditional positive regard. So it is the fact that therapists will accept their clients for who they are, and no matter what they say or do. Here is a diagram of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So in order to reach self-actualization, one needs to meet the basic needs at the bottom first. So you can see that it could be food, water, warmth, or rest. And one by one needs to reach the lower levels first in order to reach the higher levels of the pyramid. So remember in the first class, I talked about the importance of achieving the balance between study, sleep, and social. So think about the hierarchy of needs in your own studies. The schools of humanistic and also psychoanalytic schools have different approach. So for psychotherapy, they also adopt different views. Humanistic psychologists will promote growth and help their clients reach their full potential. But the goal for psychoanalytic approach would be to treat mental distress. For humanistic, they also focus on the present or the future good, such as realizing self-actualization. But for psychoanalysis, they will focus on the unconscious past. And finally, the goal of humanistic psychology is to help one reach the full potential. But for psychoanalysis, they are bringing the unconscious material to the unconscious awareness. With the rise of computer science and the advancement of technology, here we have the cognitive psychology, which is a newer school of psychology. So they think that behaviorism cannot fully explain human behavior because they neglected the inner mental processes. But with the rise of computer science, we are able to use different methods such as cognitive neuroscience to record our brain activation during processing of materials. Due to limited time in this course, we were not able to cover all of the schools of psychology, so we have just covered the most common ones. So before you take some more time to review your notes and learn about the similarities and differences among different schools, I would like you to take a step back and think about why you are learning about psychology. So here are some of the thoughts that you have told me in your first lecture about why you signed up for this course. So most of you are interested in psychology and want to learn different topics. And you all have different angles just like the different schools of psychology, and you may see things differently. So I hope you will appreciate that you all come from different backgrounds and are able to apply psychology to other disciplines that you are majoring in. Now that you are more familiar to the field of psychology, I would like you to appreciate that actually psychologists doesn't just treat mental disorders, and not all do so. So we could work in different settings. So for example, teaching responsibility, just like what I'm doing right now. And you could also work as a researcher, so doing research to answer questions about mental health. And then there's the field of doing practice, so working as a clinical psychologist or as a counselor, or even get a medical degree to work as a psychiatrist to prescribe medications on psychiatric symptoms. So we could work in different settings and sometimes multiple settings in order to promote mental well-being in the population. In this video, you have learned about the history and also various schools of psychology. I hope you will find this video helpful. And for the next one, we will learn about the common research methods and design that we use in research settings.